Hi, my name is Claus Springborg. I'm a lecturer here at Copenhagen Business School. For the past 3 years, I taught a course called Organizing Growth, focusing on community building and facilitation of dialogue and those kind of things within and around organizations as tools for growing organizations. And now I'm teaching a course called Embodied Leadership, where we take some of the newest cognitive science, especially in the domain called embodied cognition, and translates it into tools for leadership. So, and apart from teaching the courses, I do a lot of thesis supervision. And so I would like to tell you a little bit about one part of thesis supervision that's very near and dear to my heart, which is how to use a thesis as a way to land your dream job. Because when you think about it, now you're doing your thesis, and after you're done doing your thesis, then you will, go out, see if you can get a job somewhere. And it can sometimes be quite an abrupt transition. So it's really smart to use your thesis as a way of smoothing out that transition. And your thesis is a very powerful tool for doing just that. So I'm going to show you a couple of cases of how that has been done by different students. And then I'm going to give you a framework that you can use to think through how you can do it yourself, how you can use your thesis to land your dream job after you finish your studies. So the first case I want to tell you is the case that I heard many years ago, and that's the case that inspired me. It's an old acquaintance of mine who told me this story, and I thought, wow, that was so smart. And then I'm going to give you some cases of CBS students who have done the same. So my friend from back then, he was studying at media science, I think it's called, at the Copenhagen University. And he wanted to write manuscripts for movies. But he had a problem, because the people who write manuscripts for movies in Denmark, that's a very small group of people. And to become part of that group, you have to kind of know the right people. And where you get that network is by studying at the film school. And he wasn't studying at the film school. So what he did was that he said, okay, I'm going to write my thesis on how to write manuscripts for movies. And then he contacted everybody in the industry and said, I'm this cute little student from Copenhagen University who thinks what you do is absolutely fascinating. Can I come to all your meetings and sit in while you're writing manuscripts, and then I'll use some anthropological methods to study what it is you do? And they said, yeah, sure, you can do that. And when he was finished with his thesis, he knew everybody in the business. So he was very tight with everybody. And now he is writing manuscripts for movies. So when I heard that story, I thought, wow, that is the way to use your thesis. And so when I started doing thesis supervision at Copenhagen Business School, I thought, can I replicate that? How many students can I help replicate that? And so that is something that I always focus on in my thesis supervision. And so I'm going to tell you a couple of stories from some of the students I have supervised and who have been successful with this. So the first one is a student who did her thesis at Coloplast. So she really liked Coloplast as an organization. She wanted to work there. And she managed to get into a program. Coloplast has this program where they offer thesis students to come and work on some of their problems and use that as a way of doing their thesis. And what she did was that she mapped out the issues and the possibilities for value creation related to the company's evaluation procedure of their service design processes. So of course, Coloplast offers a lot of services. They have some processes for designing those services, and they have processes for evaluating their service design processes. And she was just looking at, can we extract more value from those processes? And she did good work. And after she had finished her thesis, she'd already been working, in a sense, for Coloplast for a couple of months. They really liked her. They liked the way she worked. They had gotten out of. She had already provided a lot of value for the organization, and so they hired her as assistant program manager, working on rolling out the program that she had helped develop in 7 countries. And she loved that. She really thrived in Coloplast. She was very happy about that position. And so this is an example of one way you can use your thesis for landing your dream job, namely by showcasing yourself, by working for them. So think about it. How much can you showcase yourself in a job interview? And how much can you showcase yourself over the course of 4 to 6 months, or however long it takes you to do the thesis? So Coloplast, as mentioned, they have a program in 2020. They offered 11 projects within marketing, branding, product management, and digital platforms. Of course, not all organizations have that kind of programs, but if you are interested in working for Coloplast, it's of course interesting to head over to their webpage and see what projects they have. Maybe you'll find something that interests you, something that you can write your thesis on. Good. So that was one example. So the next example was a student who was very interested in trolling online. She thought that was an interesting phenomenon. So trolling is this phenomenon where some people, they go on online communities and they start writing things to get people mad or to rile people, or they offend left and right to sort of, because they think it's fun to just get people's reactions. And this is a problem for for many organizations, because many organizations nowadays have online brand communities. So they create these online spaces where their fans, basically their loyal customers, can meet and talk about how fantastic the products are, the services are, or this organization is. And it's a problem for them if trolls find their ways to these communities and start creating a bad atmosphere there. So it's unpleasant for everybody, and it kind of ruins their possibilities of having nice, thriving brand communities. So the student, she started by looking at literature, and then she developed something like a taxonomy of trolling comments. So there are different kinds of trolling comments. Some are just baseless, offensive comments. Some of them are more, they're complaints, but complaints in a harsh tone. But since they are complaints, they have some sort of basis to them. Some go after the brand, some go after people, some go after other people in the group, so on. She developed like some sort of taxonomy here. And then she interviewed a lot of people who were experts in relevant fields around how to handle each of these types of comments. And so she interviewed somebody who was an expert in law, somebody who was an expert in freedom of speech, a branding person, a marketing person, a psychologist, and a YouTuber, and one of this particular YouTuber's fans. So the YouTuber can be seen as an expert in somebody who, it's an expert in handling trolling comments, because they get trolling all the time and they do something about it. And the YouTuber fan had a perspective, namely, well, how do you think this YouTuber deals with trolling, the way this YouTuber deals with trolling, how does that affect you as a fan? So then she collected a lot of information from these people, and she expanded and the model, and she now she had like a complete model where she had, these are the kind of trolling comments that you might encounter, and for each of these trolling comments, here are some good strategies for how to deal with them. Then she went out and presented her model to 2 organizations, One of them was British American Tobacco, and they said, if you know how to deal with trolling, you have a job. So they hired her based on that. Later, she changed her position. She changed to a different place. She didn't like working for British American Tobacco. She didn't like the culture there, so she changed to another place. But it still is a good example of how you can use your thesis to get an advantage when you apply for a job, because you can use your thesis to solve a problem that many organizations have, and then you can go out to those organizations and say, well, I know you have this problem, and I've just spent 4 to 6 months solving it, and here's the solution. Would you like me to implement that in your company? And of course, recently actually she contacted me because she wanted to now see if she can set up her own consultancy company with specialty in dealing with trolling in brand communities. So we talked about how she could write a short ebook based on her thesis, put it out online, and have people sign up to a mailing list in exchange for downloading this book. And that way she will get a mailing list of a lot of leads, a lot of potential clients for her consulting business. So that is another example of how you can use your thesis either to solve a problem for organizations and then get hired into the company to solve that particular problem, or as a basis for setting up your own business. So the next example I want to talk about, they are 2 students. They were studying marketing, and this was one of the really fun theses. I think all of the theses are really fun, but some of them stands out because they introduced me to fields that I know nothing about. So, and that's not a problem. Like, as a thesis supervisor, I find that what students need the most is input on methodology, on clear thinking about how to do their research project, and how to find the relevant information on the topic and so on. And so it's always delightful when somebody introduced me to a new topic, and we kind of hit the literature and see what we can find, and work out a strategy for researching a question within that field. Anyway, these 2 students, they were very excited because they said, in marketing, it's always nice to have a celebrity endorse your product. This is used by many companies. If some really famous person like it, then the assumption is that then the consumers will think, well, if he or she likes it, then I will probably like it too. But there's a problem, and that is that these celebrities, they go off and then they make scandals. And then all of a sudden, as an organization, you have to decouple your brand from the person very quickly, and you spend a lot of money on building it up and all these kind of things, and that's wasted. And so it's a big problem. So they were very enthusiastic because they say, well, now we have virtual celebrities. So the virtual celebrities are not people. They are CGI persons or something like that, that only exists on the internet. And there's a team behind them, so they might have social media profiles, they post a lot of things, and they have a lot of followers. And so one example of this is on Instagram. There is an Instagrammer called Lil Michaela, got tons of followers. She is even doing interviews, but only over the phone. And the nice thing about this is she will only have a scandal if the team behind her decides that she should have a scandal. Otherwise, she won't. So she's a perfect celebrity for branding purposes because you can have complete control over what she does. Another example is a singer called Hasumi Miku, who does concerts, and it's fantastic because she can do concerts all over the country at the same time. So, yes. So they formulated the question to say, well, how can we use virtual celebrities for branding purposes, marketing purposes, and is there a difference between the type of virtual celebrities we should create for marketing purposes in East and West, roughly? So maybe in Europe we need to create a different kind of virtual celebrities than in Asia. So that's what they wanted to look at. And they looked at literature, they developed some hypotheses about, based on cultural differences and stuff like this. And then they went on to test their hypothesis, and they did so by developing questionnaires and analyzing these questionnaires using statistical methods like factor analysis and t-tests in SPSS, which is a program for analyzing quantitative data, and it is freely available at Copenhagen Business School. And so the funny twist here is I spoke to one of the students a couple of months after they had ended the thesis, and she had gotten a job as a business analyst in Novo. And I was like, okay, so this must have been one of these cases where it wasn't the thesis that helped her. And she said, no, it was actually the thesis that helped her land that job, because she didn't know anything about statistical analysis before she did the thesis. But doing the thesis, she got a lot of hands-on experience with quantitative research methods, and she got in that whole mindset of saying, like, here's a hypothesis, here's how we can test it, this is the result we get, but what other explanations could there be? Can we also test whether the other explanations is actually the reason for the difference that we're seeing between, say, two groups and so on? So she learned a lot about this, and she had a big project that she could show to Novo and says, well, this is a project I did where I used quantitative research methods, and that gave her an advantage, and this is one of the reasons that Novo hired her for the position. So in short, you can say she used the thesis as a showreel, as demonstrating her capacity for analysis. So this is kind of a different way of using your thesis to land your dream job. So the final example that I want to talk about is an example of two students who were interested in accelerators. And more particularly, they were interested in accelerators working with sustainability startups. So accelerators or incubators, they're these organizations that take startups and then they help them go through the startup phase quicker. She looked at a lot of accelerators, and she looked at some accelerators that were just working with any startup and some accelerators that were working specifically with sustainability startups. And then she asked the question, are there significant differences between the elements in the programs that these two types of accelerators offer? And what they found was that actually there isn't much of a difference in the program elements, but there's a difference in the kind of networks that the different accelerators have. Which makes sense. If you want to work specifically with sustainability startups, you should have in your network as an accelerator, you should have in your network people who know about sustainability. Maybe you have to have some politicians who work in that field, so you know what are the kind of laws that are being passed and so on. So, yes. So what they did, one outcome of the thesis was that they built a very comprehensive model of program elements and how they link to each other and how they link to different stakeholders, how they are embedded in a network. So after the thesis, one of the students applied for a job at an accelerator, and again, her thesis gave her a competitive advantage. The people who she was talking to were very impressed by her in-depth knowledge of how accelerators work. And more than that, they were very impressed because she already came with a professional network that was of value to the organization. So she knew a lot of people that were good to know for accelerators. Of course, she also had a lot of knowledge about this accelerator's competitors, and they were also very interested in that, but she said, sorry, I can't disclose that. Of course, there's like a non-disclosure agreement when you do research. But still, they signed her, and or they hired her, and she was very happy about that position. So these are some examples of how CBS students have used their theses to land their dream jobs. And you can say overall there are a couple of different types of methods you can see here, where the first one used the thesis as an opportunity to showcase herself and work for the organization she wanted to work with. And the others, they gave them some sort of competitive advantage by learning certain skills, by developing their networks, and so on. And so I've made a framework that you can use for thinking through this. So this is the framework that I have developed that can help you think through how you can use your thesis to land your dream job. So it's got 3 components, and it's not that you have to work with only one of these 3 components. You can work with all 3 of them at the same time, or maybe 1 or maybe 2 of them. So the first component is, think about, can you use your thesis to solve a problem? If you solve a problem that many organizations have, that they have realized that they have, and you can come up with a good solution that will work maybe across several organizations, then you can either be hired into one of those organizations for the purpose of solving this problem, or you can set up your own consultancy company and then go around and solving this problem for different companies. And it's a very simple calculation. If solving the problem will earn the company more money than they pay you, of course they're going to hire you. So if you want to do that, if this is one of the ways in which you want to use your thesis to land your dream job, it's a good idea to interview people who have this problem. Maybe in multiple organizations, so that you have a connection to multiple people in different organizations who have the problem, who will then follow your progress, be interested, seeing what you find out. It's a good idea to aim at developing an in-depth understanding of stakeholders' perspective that's important but often not well understood. Maybe if you're looking at something around innovation inside an organization, and the management know really well the sort of the strategic value of it, but somehow for some reason their employees are not really engaging with it. Maybe that's the employee's perspective that needs to be understood better. Or it can, whatever it is you select as a topic, you can think, what are the stakeholders, and which stakeholder group is least understood? Is it the employees? Is it the collaboration partners? Is it different kind of interest organizations? Is it politicians? Is it who are the stakeholders who are not well understood? If you then understand them and provide that information to people, and it helps solve some problem, wonderful. It's a good idea to think in terms of building models. Of course, in a thesis, you have to focus on something that's quite narrow. So we're not talking a model of, how to use something like how to grow an organization, for example. Something like the kind of problems that practitioners think in are usually way too big to be answered in a good way by research, but if you have a sufficiently narrow problem, you can build a model for solving that specific problem. Also, if you go down this path, the thing about presenting the model for the people you have been in touch with is crucial. I mean, there's not much fun in solving a problem if you never tell anybody that you have solved it. So that's one pillar, you can say, in how you can think about using your thesis to land your dream job. The other theme that's important to think about is, can you use the thesis to showcase yourself? So here you can think about, if you want to use the thesis to showcase yourself to specific organizations, it's good to think about how can you find ways of spending a lot of time in the organization. How can you formulate a research question that addresses a problem that the organization has, and show how you can use research method to address the problem. Many times organizations have a hard time understanding what it is that in-depth knowledge of research methodology can do for them, but when they see what systematic and rigorous research methodology can do in terms of addressing their problems, they're often very impressed. So it's a very good example. If you're hired, they might not want to give you the time you need to do the in-depth research, but as they're not paying you because you're just a thesis student, then you will have the time to do it, and that can often open the organization's eyes to see what research methods can really do for them. Of course, if you want to go down this road, a crucial aspect is to maybe interview people in the organization and present your results for them. And it has to be people who actually has the possibility to hire you. So think in terms of, who should I interview? How should I formulate my questions so it gives me an excuse to interview the kind of people who have the power to hire, make decisions about how to hire. And maybe you want to use some sort of ethnographical method, because that gives you an excuse to spend a lot of time in the organization. So with the problem solving, you saw that very much in the case of Coloplast, and Coloplast was also a case of showcasing yourself. With this problem solving, the case of using virtual celebrities is also a way of solving a particular problem for organizations. If anybody were thinking about using virtual celebrities, you can then go to them and say, look, this is a good way of thinking about it. These are some things that you should take into consideration when you create or select a virtual celebrity. They should somehow speak to the market that you want to address. And of course, the case with trolling was a typical case of solving a problem. And then first using the method for solving the problem to pitch oneself to a company and get hired. And then second, to say, well, actually, I want to take the jump and build my own consultancy company. Then the last theme that you can think about is this thing about how can you use the thesis process to gain advantage over other job applicants. And there's a couple of ways to do this. One, learning relevant research methods, like in the case with the virtual celebrities, where the student ended up being hired because she was very familiar with quantitative methods and could showcase that she has the capacity to think deeply and rigorously about this, not just crunch some numbers and then accept the outcome as apparently this is, but having the capacity to challenge the outcome and say, well, is that really what the numbers tell me, or might they tell a different story, so that you can get some sort of solidity in what you believe the numbers are telling you. But of course, it's not just quantitative learning to interview people, learning to code, and not just say, well, I talked to some people and I think this is what they told me, but learning to code the interview so you can overcome your own biases and see what kind of stories can I actually create from this material that go beyond just my first impressions. Another thing is you gain an advantage by simply familiarizing yourself with the newest relevant research. So do your thesis on a topic that you want to work with, because I think research literature, again, this is like an often untapped gold mine. Many organizations have problems that researchers have already addressed, but because people in organizations often don't have the time to sit around and read research papers, they don't know that somebody have already addressed the problem. But you will. You will have the time to do a rigorous literature review where you find all the research that speak to a particular organizational issue. And you will come to a job interview with that knowledge. You can say, actually, this was researched and that was what they found, and that really gives you, it equips you with valuable knowledge when you know how to read the research and translate it into what that means for organizations. Then, of course, we also saw in the case of the accelerators how you accumulate industry-specific knowledge. You accumulate knowledge about pains and gains, what enables stuff and what blocks stuff in companies, and you build a relevant professional network. And this is all something that really speak to your advantage in when you are at a job interview. If you come there and they say, well, when I hire this person, they already pretty much up to speed with a lot of the stuff that goes on in the industry, so that cuts down on the time we need to invest in them to get them up to speed. And they also already have connection with people and relationships to people that are relevant for our work here. That's very valuable too. Good, so that is a framework you can use to think about how to use your thesis to get to your dream job. Finally, final slide here, I want to pass on some advice from a former OIE student. So this is an OIE student that I spoke with a year after she handed in and defended her thesis. Just to follow up, I was just curious, I'm always curious, where do the students that I have supervised, where do they go? How do they use the thesis? And does it work, this plan of getting to your dream job through your thesis? And one of the things I asked her was what would be her advice to students who are currently in their thesis process. And I think the advice she gave was very useful, so I'm going to pass it on. First of all, she said, don't be afraid to reach out to people that you really want to work with. I think that's a really good piece of advice. Look around and see who are the absolutely most interesting and cool people that you just really want to know, really want to have in your network, and then just write them, call them, contact them. I think some students have the idea that if, they probably don't want to talk to me, I'm just a master's student, why would they want to talk to me? But actually, in my experience, people are often very willing to talk to master's students because they know that they have the newest knowledge. They know they come with fresh eyes. It's a couple of fresh eyes to look at their problems. They know that talking to a master's student, they might get input that they won't get from people inside their organization or from themselves, because they have certain ways of thinking about things, and it's nice with fresh eyes to challenge that. And also, people in organizations are always looking for new talent, and if a master student sort of call them and say, well, I'm looking at this issue, and I think it seems like that is something that's relevant to your organization, and I would like to spend 4, 5, 6 months trying to solve this problem that's relevant to the organization. I mean, it shows some initiative, it shows some oomph, and it's just nice personal qualities. So it's gonna many people would really welcome being contacted in that way. Of course, there are people who are just, they might like to talk to you, but they're too busy. But don't take it personally. Just keep on reaching out to people. The next piece of advice is do kickoff sessions and scoping sessions with practitioners in parallel with working on your literature review, so you formulate research questions that are relevant to practitioners. So, of course, your research question has to come out of the literature. It has to be a research question, which is different from a practitioner question. Practitioners tend to ask much broader questions. Researchers ask very specific, narrow questions that can be answered within, in a rigorous way within 4, 5, 6 months. And but you still want your research question to be the kind of question where when you tell it to practitioners, they say, that's actually interesting. I'd love to see what you find out. So doing those kind of scoping sessions, you can read through the literature, you can formulate a couple of questions that are research questions based on the literature, and then you can just talk to practitioners and say, what do you see? Which one of these questions do you find most interesting and why? It will also give you input to the part of the literature review that's about arguing for the relevance of your research question. So yes, that's a good advice. Other than that, she says, get out there, connect with people, do field research. You can, in principle, write a purely theoretical thesis. I have supervised people who wrote theoretical thesis or thesis where the data was sort of freely available data that they just find, and that you don't have to talk to anybody to get that data. But I think it's a pity to waste the opportunity to get out there, get industry-specific knowledge, showcase yourself, build your network. So I agree with that one. Connect with people, do field research. Then another piece of advice is listen to the OIE thesis talk podcast. So this student that I was talking to, she was involved with creating this podcast. So of course she recommends that you listen to it. And I think it's a good recommendation. They have talked to a lot of students right after they handed in their thesis, and they talked about what they explored and what their challenges were and all these kind of things. And you can actually learn a lot from listening to some of these stories, both in terms of like what are good research questions and what are some of the obstacles they've met along the way, how did they overcome it, these kind of things. Then the last piece of research is do the presentation of your research findings for everyone that you have worked with throughout the thesis process. And this is good for multiple reasons. First, it is a really good practice for the thesis defense. You get an opportunity to do your 10-15 minute presentation and then answer questions. Practitioners might not ask all the same. I mean, practitioners won't sort of grill you on your philosophy of research and your ontology and epistemology, but they will ask about business impact, for example. So they will actually ask some of the same questions that you might also get in the thesis defense. Not all of them, but some of them. So it's a really good way of practicing the thesis defense. And if you come to the thesis defense and you've already done like 3 presentations of your research, you will feel much calmer. So, yeah. The other one is that when you give back to the people who have provided you with their time, maybe with some data, something like this, they feel valued. It's just a nice way of showing appreciation to get back to them and say, okay, so this thing that you participated in, here are the most important findings. Also, it gives you a sense of how your thesis findings can be applied in practice. When you present the findings to practitioners, you can simply just ask them like, what impact do you see that these findings have or could have on your organization? If what I found is true, will that affect how you think about your strategy? Will it make you want to change some of your processes? Will it make you do something new? Will it make you do something different? And as mentioned before, one of the learning objectives is that you have to be able to translate your thesis findings into practical consequences or applications. And what better place to get input for that than from the practitioners themselves? And finally, it gives you an opportunity to tell the companies that you want to work for them. So I think this is crucial. You might feel cheeky to do it, but I really think it's a wonderful recommendation. Imagine you go to a company, you present your research findings, they are thrilled about it. You have an interesting discussion about how your findings can be applied in practice and what it means for the company. They will sit there with a sense, wow, we've already gotten a lot of value for free from this person. And then you say, by the way, I think your company is amazing. I would love to work for you. Do you have any openings? Can you see any opportunities for me can you create a job for me, for example? And they might have something. And if they don't have something now, then you will say, well, who should I stay in touch with to hear something? Or and then you can check in with them regularly and say, hey, it was me doing the thing and the presentation. So how are things for you? Have you used some of the things I have told you? And by the way, do you have some job openings? So I think this is a very good advice. Okay. So I hope that this presentation helps you think through how you can use this precious opportunity of the thesis process to land your dream job. And I do thesis supervision. I have just ended one round of thesis students, which means I have the possibility to take on board new ones. I do have a limit on how many thesis students I can work with, so it's first come, first serve. But if you are interested in working with me as a supervisor, or just want to have a talk about working with me as a supervisor, feel free to contact me. You have my mail, and yes. So enjoy the thesis process. It is an awesome process, and it can be so interesting. And yes, thank you.